He bought the ranch for $22. $22 and a single signature that transferred a dying patch of New Mexico land into his name, and yet as John Mercer rode toward it, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had purchased far more than anyone had told him. The sky was burning gold with sundown, the kind that seemed to set the whole desert on fire, when he first saw the house, leaning, brittle, and quiet in a way that felt wrong. It was the kind of silence that presses against your lungs. And before he ever stepped inside, before he ever pushed open that warped wooden door, he felt something watching him. John had left the world because he no longer trusted himself in it. A former Union scout who carried more ghosts than scars, he had wandered since the war, looking for a place where the quiet wouldn't suffocate him. When he heard an old prospector at a saloon muttering about abandoned property, goin' for next to nothing, got bad luck stitched into the soil, John didn't hesitate. $22 seemed a fair price for solitude. But as he swung off his horse and walked toward the ranch house, the boards groaning under his boots, he realized solitude had shadows of its own. He smelled it before he saw it, a faint earthiness, something old, something that didn't belong to an empty house. When he opened the door, a gust of stale air pushed past him like an exhale that had been held too long. His eyes adjusted to the dim interior, and that's when he saw her. A young Apache girl, no more than 15 or 16, suspended from a beam by a frayed rope, her feet barely brushing the dirt floor. She wasn't moving. The world seemed to tilt around John as his hand trembled on the doorframe. He wasn't a stranger to death, but this was something different. A wrongness so profound it nearly brought him to his knees. He cut her down with the urgency of a man who couldn't bear to witness another senseless loss. When he laid her carefully on the floor, he noticed something odd. Her skin still held warmth. Faint, but there. John pressed two shaking fingers to her neck. A pulse, weak as a whisper. The impossible reality hit him. She was alive. John worked through the night, tending to her with what little skill he had. He gave her water drop by drop, covered her with his blanket, and whispered words he hoped she couldn't hear, because they were confessions of fear, of guilt, of uncertainty. When morning light finally crawled across the floorboards, the girl's eyes fluttered open. She stared at him with suspicion and pain, but also with a fierce will to live. She told him her name was Nelina. She spoke slowly, her voice rough, and John learned that she had been taken by a band of outlaws hunting for gold that legend claimed was hidden somewhere on the property. When they didn't find it, they tried to use her heritage as a curse, believing her hanging spirit would drive away anyone who settled there. They left her for dead and rode off laughing. Her village, she said, had been searching for her for days. John listened, his hands tightening around the coffee tin until it shook. The world was filled with cruelty, he knew, but he felt responsible now. He had bought the land, he had walked into its darkness. Now he had to bring back the light. Over the next days, he nursed Nelina back to strength. She was quiet but sharp-eyed, noticing everything. She studied the land like someone reading a familiar story. There were moments when their silence felt heavy, and others when it felt like understanding. John learned about her family, her people, and the songs that echoed through the Mescalero Mountains long before settlers arrived. She learned that he carried the weight of war in his bones and that he had come here trying to outrun his own story. But trouble has a way of following wounded souls. One morning, Nelina stiffened as she looked toward the horizon. Dust clouds rising, too deliberate to be wind. The outlaws were coming back. Maybe they realized she might have survived. Maybe they feared she'd tell someone the truth. Or maybe they had returned to finish the job and claim the land properly. John had two choices: run with the girl or stand and face the men who had nearly killed her. For the first time in years, he chose not to run. He helped Nelina hide in the old storage cellar behind the house and promised her he would return. She gripped his sleeve for a moment longer than necessary, her dark eyes steady with trust he wasn't sure he deserved. But he nodded and stepped into the sun, his rifle in hand and his rage finally finding a purpose. The men arrived with smirks and swagger, but John confronted them with the kind of quiet fury that unnerves even the cockiest outlaw. Words were exchanged, accusations, lies, truths, and when the gunsmoke cleared, two men lay wounded, one dead, and John stood breathing hard in the settling dust. A sheriff from a nearby town, tipped off somehow by Nelina's tribe, arrived moments later to take control of the scene. The outlaws were hauled away, their bravado replaced by fear. Nalina emerged from hiding, her steps slow, her gaze fixed on the land. She said something soft in Apache, and though John didn't understand the words, he felt their weight. She told him her people were nearby and that she would return to them. But before she left, she placed her hand over his heart and said, "Pain hides here. But so does courage." Her tribe welcomed her back with tears and relief, and though John expected never to see her again, she surprised him. Each week, she walked the dusty trail to his ranch, sometimes alone, sometimes with others. They helped him fix the house, tend the land, and heal the wounds buried in the soil. Slowly, the ranch transformed from a place of tragedy to one of shared purpose. And slowly, John realized that the land he bought for $22 had given him something priceless: redemption. By the time the house stood straight, the fields grew green again, and laughter echoed where silence once suffocated the air. John understood a truth he had spent years avoiding. It is not isolation that heals a broken soul, but connection. Years later, when storytellers spoke of the rancher and the Apache girl he saved, they didn't speak of the darkness that once hung inside the house. They spoke of how two wounded lives crossed in the desert, and how from that meeting came courage, reconciliation, and a future no one expected. John, looking out over the land at sunset, would often say that the moment he found Nalina wasn't the darkest chapter of his life, it was the beginning of the light. Because sometimes the world breaks you open not to end you, but to let something stronger grow in the cracks. In the $22 ranch, it became a place where people gathered, where cultures blended, where fears softened, and where forgiveness, both of others and of oneself, was learned like any other trade. A reminder whispered through the desert winds.